Despite CrowdStrike's best efforts, all the cars were out on track to watch Oscar Piastri pilfer a maiden victory for McLaren. Guess he spent 36 hours straight working on that one. Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Tom Downey, and here today we're going to discuss the 2024 Hungarian Grand Prix. Joining me, we have Grid Talk co-host Owen Medford.
Hello.
Hello, sir. And we have Grid Talk Boo, aka my Boo, Tom Horrocks.
Get in, McLaren.
Oh, I should have seen that one coming. As I'm sure we can all guess how this podcast is going to go. Before we get into the episode, we must thank our sponsor, BetOnline. So BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics, baseball to F1 racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack and poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today and get in on the action. Use the promo code BLEE for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here. And also, the usual plug, please follow the socials at GridTalk UK to stay up to date with the show. So, chaps, now that the housekeeping is out of the way, the 2024 Hungarian Grand Prix. And Owen, I'm going to come to you because the first thing we have to discuss, Oscar Piastri has won his first Grand Prix victory for McLaren. Wow.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? Obviously it was the first of this lineup to win a race with the sprint. But yeah, finally McLaren sort of not still through hell or high water. Managed to extract a win out of this run of races. It's obviously it's great that that Oscar is the first. He's got his first win on the board. I assume there will be more to come. It wasn't, unfortunately, it's been a bit tarnished, as we will get into. But I think it was a great performance from Oscar. He drove a fairly good race. I think he got maybe a little bit unlucky in some places, and maybe didn't make his own luck in others. But apart from that, he has come out on top, and things seem to be okay, at least between the two drivers right now. But it could have not ended up that way. But either way, it was a great sort of start for him. He was faster off the line than Norris, and as a result, that kind of trended towards him getting the win today.
Absolutely. It certainly wasn't an easy victory for him. And he actually had to work for it, especially at the end of the race, as we'll get on to later on. But Tom, just looking at the start of the race, which is where it could be argued that Oscar Piastri certainly helped himself win the race, or certainly where he enabled it. He started P2, obviously it was the McLaren front row, lockout from qualifying, and obviously a front row in the race. He started on what can be described as the sort of dirtier side of the grid. Ultimately appeared to get a slightly better second phase in the launch than his teammate Lando. Lando tried squeezing him against the wall. Did remind me a bit of Schumacher on Barrichello, wrong Brazilian. But ultimately he saw himself through into turn one and then was leading up until what we'll talk about later on. There was a little bit of sort of hoo-ha at the race starts. We did see Nico Hülkenberg had to box at the end of that one, looked like he had a damaged front wing. And also, as we all know in F1, 3 into 1 doesn't go, as we saw at turn 1. So we had Oscar Piastri on the inside taking the lead from his teammate Lando Norris, who was in the middle. And then we had Max Verstappen trying to make an opportunistic move around the outside at turn 1 to try and take the lead, and ultimately failed. Tom, what was your viewpoint on this sort of turn 1? I'm going to call it an incident. Ultimately nothing came of it because Max eventually gave the position back, which was the start of a rather hot under the collar race for him. Maybe should stick to sim racing. What was your sort of view on the race start itself?
Well, it's a really interesting race start because obviously it did set the tone for the race on Verstappen's side of things. But definitely the launch from Lando looked like it was good, but Piastri just got an absolutely mega launch. But Obviously, I love McLaren and I hold them to a very high standard, so I am going to be a little bit critical. I said before the race, what McLaren have to do is put all of the driver politics aside. They've got the fastest car here, and what they've been doing a lot recently is they've been shadow boxing. They've been trying to cover people that aren't there. And when you've got the fastest car, you're 1-2, just pick the best strategy for the race. Don't worry about covering people because you've got the fastest package. You've got the tools to win the race. So what you got to do is optimize your race. To optimize the race, doesn't matter out of Lando or Oscar who gets the best start. Those two are opposite sides of the grid to each other. They both just drive alongside each other and then they protect that position. But as it was, Lando cuts across. He hinders Piastri, which then gives Verstappen a run at both of them, and he causes that situation to occur. You can only do this with teammates, and we've seen Ferrari do it. I think it was in Sochi a few years ago we saw them do it. So it can be done, and it can be done very well. Put the egos aside. Lando and Piastri going into turn one side by side, covering the middle of the track, and then it doesn't matter who comes out first. Just give each other space, and then they can just take the race from there. They can drive away. They've got the pace. I mean, they didn't know exactly what the pace was going to be for Red Bull at that point, but everything was pointed towards them having a better race car. I just didn't see why Lando had to defend so heavily from Piastri. Just let him go alongside, let him take the lead into the corner, and then you can look at it for strategy. We all know that Lando's got generally a better race pace than Oscar. I don't know if his throttle issue was anything to do with it. I'd say potentially not, given the pace he had towards the end of the race, but certainly in the first stint, Oscar seemed to have the pace over him. So I feel like that was something that was encouraged by McLaren that they could have potentially avoided with a little bit of clever play. Verstappen, of course, he's going to go for it because as far as he was expecting something a bit better from the upgrades. He was expecting the car to be back in its dominant position. The updates, sorry, not the upgrades, appear to have not done as much as he had hoped. Clearly, they've done something because they've done a back-to-back with Perez, and they feel like that was worth keeping on the car. So he's going to have a go on the outside there. Of course he is. But yeah, I mean, it's clear as day. Lando's did nothing wrong. He couldn't go anywhere. He's just made it round the corner brilliantly with Oscar, the pair of them doing that very well in the end. And then he's gone off track. So the sensible thing to do would have just been to slot into position. But again, like he's been instructed by his team to give the position back. So no harm, no foul. The only thing it has done is put a little bit of a gap between Oscar and Lando, where he's been in that position. So it kind of killed the race between the McLarens at that point in the race. Don't blame him for doing it. Probably should have given the place back a few laps earlier. But the ultimate lack of self-awareness there has caused this mental mindset to come in, and it only got worse from there. So it definitely set the tone for the race for Verstappen. I think if he'd handled it slightly differently, a bit more pragmatically, his race would have unfolded probably with him being on the podium with the McLarens.
Absolutely. And yeah, Max had a couple of clangers in this race, which we'll get into later on with his old nemesis, Lewis Hamilton. But Owain, what does this do for the Drivers' Championship? Because before this race, I think I think after this race, Max is 53 points ahead. Now, in the Drivers' Championship, it is Lando who is in second, and this has been a bit of a sort of bone of contention, certainly within our Slack chat earlier. There were some people saying, Lando should have won because of the championship antics, etc. But other people are saying, Piastri should have won because he was ahead at the start and at the first pit stops. Sort of looking at the bigger picture, and when I say the bigger picture, I mean the 2024 World Drivers' Championship. Do you think this is sort of a bit of a turning point? Because this is the first time, I think, since 2022. First time since 2023 that Max has lost points in a constructors weekend. Which, if you think about it, is over 12 months where he hasn't had a net gain of points in a race weekend, which is pretty mad, sort of by itself. Do you think that McLaren can actually mount a serious challenge for Max for the remainder of this season, bearing in mind we are halfway through? Or do you think he's sort of come at almost too little too late?
I'll put it this way. The only allegory to that comes to mind is maybe it's Braun, basically, at the start of 2009, where they went and won it was almost half the races at that point on the bounce, and then didn't win another race from very early on in the season. Obviously, this is completely different, where as much as the Red Bull has slowed down and is still very fast, it's still not. It's not. There's not another team, another one team hounding them entirely. I personally think in the constructors that Red Bull can't. I don't think they can sustain. I basically I don't. I'm come up right now and say it. I don't think Red Bull are winning this constructors. No way whatsoever right now with the way things are, just due to the deficit in pace between their two drivers and how close the field is now. Particularly with some of the races coming up. In comparison to that, I think it's a little bit more difficult to say that Verstappen is going to lose this championship. I think he's, as we've been talking about, he's put the damage in early, as Max, and made a very good lead. I've got it at, I think it's currently what is it, 76 points between Verstappen and Norris, which means that Norris needs 7 points per race weekend. So basically, he needs a win, and for Max not to get a fastest lap per race weekend to catch Max. And very helpfully, Tom's also put the McLaren needs 6 points per race weekend to catch Red Bull, which is a little bit more attainable, I think, given the way that their drivers are. What they need to not do is what happened this weekend, where there was a bit of fighting. And I think it was maybe played less than less strategically than it could have been by Norris. I think maybe he could have, rather than have this fight up until what was it, 2 or 3 laps remaining on the radio very publicly, which shows discontent between everyone. Yeah, I think there's another way that they could have done this, and actually it would have been. I think it would have been more helpful for them, and maybe close that gap even further. That's just provisional right now. Obviously, we've got the effects of the Hamilton and Verstappen collision to go through. But apart from that, yeah, I think it's definitely on for McLaren to at least get the constructors, possibly even the drivers, should anything happen.
Yeah, absolutely. There's still a long way to go in this sort of like mad season this has turned out to be. And so, do you remember at the start of the season when we were concerned that it's going to be even worse than last year? Remember when Perez used to finish on the podium? Yeah, Pepperidge fan remembers. Tom, we it's sort of looking at sort of rivalries. We had a bit of a sort of revisit of one from yesteryear. A couple of people saying 2021 Max is back. I think it's safe to say that we did see that a bit, and we saw obviously his old nemesis Lewis Hamilton, the two of them having a sort of tremendous scrap with Hamilton putting on some very, very robust and fair, for the most part, defending. Max obviously not happy with how his car is, unable to get past, and ultimately caused his own collision where he practiced doing a somersault down into turn 1, of which at the time of recording and speaking he is still under investigation for. As a side note to anybody listening or watching live, we will update you as and when that comes in. To anybody listening to this after the fact, at the moment we don't have the outcome of that. We will update you as and when it comes. But for Hamilton, this was his 200th podium in F1 at one of his most sort of favourite and one of his most successful circuits. His second most successful circuit, I believe, in terms of race wins, where he's had 8 race wins here. Obviously, last weekend he reached 9 at Silverstone. So a circuit which he does adore, a circuit where he got his first win with Mercedes in 2013. And yeah, another podium. Bearing in mind, Mercedes looked a bit sort of a bit of an outside bet, you could say, bearing in mind where his teammate qualifies. We rib on the second Red Bull for qualifying down in Q1, but that's the second time in 2 years that George Russell's done it here. So Sergeant for the Mercedes seat, say word. But Max versus Hamilton, that was fun to watch today, wasn't it?
It definitely was. I mean, I'm really glad that we've finally getting to see this battle again, because it's all been one-way traffic. And people say return of 2021 Max Verstappen. I don't feel like that Max Verstappen ever went away, because when Max Verstappen was out front pre-2021, he was the same serene driver that he is now. And when we've seen Max fighting, he has been behaving this way. I remember this Grand Prix at Silverstone where he was fighting with Mick Schumacher for 7th, and he was this same, unhappy with his car, getting lungy. I feel like he probably needed a good night's sleep, which he didn't get because he was sim racing. But yeah, it's a going to Lewis Hamilton though. It's a phenomenal achievement, that 200 podiums. I'm glad it has come, because there was definitely the start of this season. You were thinking, well, is he going to get those podiums this year? And you think, yeah, even if Ferrari have a horrendous run with him in there, that you think he'd get to that 200 podiums eventually. So I'm glad it has finally come, and I'm glad it's come at a track that he's seen so much success at as well. Slightly disappointed Mercedes weren't closer. It was still a 2-team battle, well, a 3-driver battle for the win. It would have been nice to have seen Ferrari or Mercedes getting involved a bit more there. For the race itself, I don't think Hamilton did anything wrong during the race itself. I mean, we'll get onto it later. But he's probably my driver of the day because of his performance there. The only driver that didn't really put a foot wrong. I mean, you could say Lando Norris didn't put a foot wrong, but I'm sure we'll get onto that as well. But no, I think that it was he was measured. He was very much. I think he's probably learnt from his best mate Fernando Alonso from 2020 when he was stuck behind him for God knows how long, and he just raced cleanly, and 2021, sorry, yeah, he just raced cleanly and didn't get flustered. He was on to coin a Ron Dennis frame, a suboptimal strategy, but on the face of it, it's the only strategy that would have given him A, track position over Max Verstappen, and B, a chance at beating Max Verstappen, because Max had more pace than the Mercedes. That gave them a chance, and it just meant that it needed some brilliance on tyre strategy and defending to do that. And track position is key. It was very, very difficult to pass here unless you've got a massive tyre offset. So they tried to give Max a tyre offset, but unfortunately he was already in a bit of a stinking mood by then. So it was I didn't think it was ever going to happen. Just before the collision, I said, after the when he allegedly got pushed out on lap 1, I said, well, later in the race he's going to do that to someone else. So he's going to dive bomb someone and push them off track. And I said, I'll watch. He's going to dive bomb Hamilton any minute here. You watch. The next lap, then the collision happens. I'm just glad that it didn't end anyone's race. And I'm not fussed if there's a penalty or not for it, because worst case scenario, he's 18 seconds ahead of Perez. Unless he gets a 30-second penalty, which I think would be harsh, it's not gonna affect him. It's only going to put him behind Carlos Sainz, which is a 2-point swing. And I think the penalty is the penalty. He's ended up losing 2 positions because of that. So I'm fine with it not being a penalty. Self-policing in that one. It was a dive bomb. It was causing a collision. But I think it probably will be punished, but I wouldn't be annoyed if it wasn't.
No, that's a fair point, and I do see where you're coming from. But what I would say, even as someone who is a Max fan, we are supposed to penalise the incident, not the outcome. And he did cause that incident, so I would still expect to see him penalised. Once again, as when we get any updates on that, we'll let you know. But we haven't seen anything as of yet. So, Owain, let's have a look at the second drivers for both Mercedes and Red Bull, because they were both in quite similar positions this weekend. They both went out in Q1. They both started on hard. They both tried sort of different strategies, and they both finished in the points. Do you think that there's sort of something to be said here about experience, or is it just the curse of these second seats? Or is there something else at play here? Or do you think George's was a bit of an anomaly compared to Perez, who it would be more of an anomaly if he didn't go out in Q1?
I think it's beginning to get that way for Perez, but I don't actually want to criticise him too much today. I don't think there's necessarily need for it. I think earlier in the weekend that was the time where Perez had an absolute stinker. I think it was FP2 when he got the put his wheel on the white line on a wet white line and shoved it into the barrier. That was punishment enough. And I think actually the reason that they've had a remarkably similar race actually, and that they both went out in Q1 because of inclement weather and not being able to improve. I don't believe, and then run a relatively similar race. As I was watching, I did think that Perez was having a better run of it, but I think that must have been due to traffic, bearing in mind the fact that they've ended up 3 and a bit seconds apart from each other. I'm not sure what a grid slot. Bear in mind they started one next to the other. I'm not sure what a grid slot makes difference wise, but clearly they run a fairly similar race on exactly the same strategy, and use their car performance in a way that I think probably benefits Perez. It must be said, understeer seemed to be the sort of thing that Max was struggling with. He likes a pointy car, and by comparison, Perez doesn't so much. So I think this is one of the rarer weekends where actually this plays into his hands, and I think it's actually a fairly good performance. The fact is that they shouldn't have been where they were, both of them. It's been consistent actually. I think that we've talked about McLaren and Ferrari both having two drivers up there, and by comparison, Red Bull and Mercedes haven't seemed to. So I think it's relatively good, but I think the question does still remain. We know that this is more of an anomalous performance, but from Russell, but by comparison from Perez, it's one that we've been making jokes about for at least the last a month and a half, 2 months. And to be quite honest, ever since he got the contract extension, there's rumours that there are performance clauses that I think as of yet Perez is struggling to meet. I think it's kind of one of those things where if you're Christian Horner and you're Helmut Marko and the rest of the Red Bull fraternity are thinking, is this the sort of person who, given that now we're looking at the Constructors' Championship, thinking, McLaren can outscore us by 6 points every race on average until the end of the season. Do we really need this driver in the seat, or do we really want this driver in the seat when there is someone who is maybe better suited to the car, who might be able to more consistently get us the kind of points that we need to stave off the kind of challenges that we're currently facing?
Absolutely. And excuse me, you segued me really nicely into my point for you, Tom. I don't like sort of speculating about drivers, because I've tried to defend Perez for a while, and I've tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I realise how twisted this is, giving this question to you, because I've got a feeling this is going to get us some lovely, lovely jubbly clips. How long is it before Red Bull make a decision on that second seat? And how long is it before we see someone else in that? And I'll sort of lead it with a second question, and I'll come back to you for that one. Who do you want to see in that second Red Bull seat, and when do you think it will happen?
Well, I'll start with that and say I don't want to see someone else in that seat. Long may this continue. I want this to keep rolling on because McLaren could potentially win a Constructors' Championship with Sergio Perez in that car. But I am going to say, I'm going to shock you. 2 weekends in a row where Sergio Perez has underperformed and not delivered on track. I'm not going to criticise him. I don't think he could have done any more today. I think today, obviously qualifying was completely his fault, and that's on him. But the last race, I think Red Bull did him dirty. I said that at the time. I don't think he was given a strategy to be able to come forward in the race. He was Max's guinea pig. And I think today, he was behind George Russell for a lot of the race. He did a good middle stint to get ahead of Russell, and Russell was closing on him a couple of seconds a lap towards the end. He managed to up his pace enough to keep Russell behind him. I don't think he could have done any more in that race. What's he going to do? Like, he started at the back on hard tires, and then he's finished behind a Ferrari within a pit stop window. I think that's all Perez could have realistically done. I don't think it's certainly not enough to say this guy is the guy we want going forwards. But today, I have no issues with his performance. I have issues with his performance yesterday, but that's not the question. The race performance was fine today from Perez, and that's what we've seen. It's qualifying that's let him down. I think that Red Bull should replace him. Like I said, I don't want them to, but I think they should replace him. I don't know who would be the best one, but really, I can now see it going to potentially Daniel Ricciardo, because I just think, I don't want it to, don't get me wrong, but they clearly don't rate Tsunoda. It would be crazy to put Lawson in, and unless they can get like Carlos Sainz in, or would they go for someone like Mick Schumacher? He's available. He can't be any worse than Perez, surely. But I'm not saying, again, I don't think that will happen. But this is the options they got available to them. I mean, do they bring De Vries back? Stranger things have happened, but it's a hard situation. I think his position within the team is now untenable. I think they will lose a constructors championship if they stay with him for the rest of the season, unless he can turn it around. But Perez at his peak, with the field is as close as it is still not enough to finish ahead of a McLaren every week. Unless there's going to be problems with the McLarens. I mean, they haven't had a lot of bad luck with regards to retirements or reliability or anything. Those two drivers have finished the most races of anyone this season. So they're clearly reliable. They're clearly fast. They're clearly in the fight every weekend. So if Red Bull want to win the Constructors' Championship, they have to do something, but they need to put someone in there who they know is going to perform in that car. Tsunoda has never driven that car. Ricciardo has. They know he can perform in that car. So realistically, he probably would be the most sensible solution. Not long term, I would say just for 6 months and then potentially Tsunoda next year. But I think I would be going with potentially Ricciardo. If I was in Red Bull's position, I would probably look at Ricciardo over Tsunoda right now, because there's clearly not a lot between Tsunoda and Ricciardo now with regards to overall performance. He seems to have turned the corner on that side of things, and he has the experience of running up front that Tsunoda doesn't have, because he's still a bit of a hothead at times. So that would be my take on it, but I'll leave you guys to discuss.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you're hearing there is baby brain in action. Hearing Daniel Ricciardo in that second Red Bull seat is possibly one of the biggest L takes I've heard this year. Yeah. On a real note, I'm not quite sure I agree about putting Daniel Ricciardo in that seat. I think he's barely holding on to that V-carb seat, let alone a seat at the big table. But that's quite the take there, Tom. And we got some interesting comments in the live chat, which we'll get into in the post show. Right, chaps, I want to get into the sort of biggest bit of the race, which is the closing stages. This is obviously about the Lando and the Piastri, and then by extension the McLaren team orders that we saw. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's obviously sort of keep it civil. I'll come to you first. We saw Oscar was leading; he'd been leading the whole race. Lando got the preferential strategy to box. He was then told under team orders that he would have to give the position back to Piastri, and then what unfolded was 10 or 11 laps or so of sort of nail-biting, sort of whatever you can call that, and then ultimately he did give the position back. What's your sort of view, take on the whole thing?
I think that you have to admit, or not admit, you have to concede before, or at least keep in your brain when you think about everything that went on, in that these are racing drivers. They are professional sportsmen. I mean, all of them, everyone there is an incredibly driven, incredibly arrogant, incredibly stubborn individual. If you aren't, you're not a racing driver. You shouldn't be there. You don't get wins. You don't get positions. You don't get wins. You don't get world championships by rolling over and saying, yeah, okay. And Andrea Stella made a good point in, after the race, in that, it would almost be wrong for a racing driver to say, yeah, okay, fine. I think you expect a little bit of a fight. But by the same token, as you say, Piastri was leading the race. Norris did get the preferential strategy. Absolutely. And I think maybe there's a little bit of give and take in that, yes, he's the closest one to Max. Yes, he's probably the closest to winning the getting the championship off Max, if that is even a possibility. But at a certain point, there's going to come a day where Norris will need Piastri's help. There are races that Max has lost because Perez hasn't even been there. What if Perez was instead choosing not to be there, sort of thing? You need someone's help to. I'm using that position, that example as a sort of kind of out there thing. But I do think that at the end of the day, it was a little bit childish for Norris to be like, no, and then extend the gap as much as possible. He's made his point, and I think he may well have destroyed an awful lot of goodwill within the team by doing that. This wasn't an on-track, wheel-to-wheel battle that caused this. It was the fact that he got pitted first and he got preferential strategy on a time where, preferential strategy on a track where the undercut is incredibly powerful, as we've seen over the years, particularly on a hot day like today. And as a result of that, he got some of the better things. He got pitted backwards so that he didn't have to maybe go through the traffic as much as Piastri did, because Piastri was winning the race. That's the sort of thing that he avoided, and maybe you can't see it when you're in the car. I think the only misstep that maybe McLaren made was not having Andrea Stella after the third or fourth radio message coming down and handing down the order himself. I know he sees it as his job to sort of stand off and let people do their jobs, but at a certain point you have to tell the driver from the top that, hold on, we're paying your salary, you need to move over. That this is how it's going to work, and we will return the favor to you later. I think that's how it should have worked, and I think Norris was being petulant.
Yeah, there definitely sort of is a sort of element of petulance involved in this. Speaking of petulant people, Tom, what was your viewpoint? Sorry, I had to do that one. I know we spoke about this before we went on there. So, what's your viewpoint on sort of how this whole incident was handled? Was this something that the drivers sort of could have handled themselves? Could McLaren have handled it better? Do you think maybe McLaren put themselves in this position? Because how many times have we criticised them about strategy? And again, today, you could argue that their strategy caused this incident. I know I'm sort of preloading the question a bit for you, but oh well. You could argue that McLaren kind of caused this strategy by boxing Lando first and then putting everybody in this position. What's your viewpoint on, or so your take on the whole thing, and keep it clean?
Yeah, as always. So my take, one of my general notes I made was McLaren inviting controversy again. There was absolutely no need for it. When Hamilton made the undercut, they said to Piastri, we're not going to cover Hamilton because we feel it's far too early to box. So they clearly looking at Hamilton, knowing that he's catching them, watching his lap times, and then they wait until it gets to the point when Lando has to box or he's in trouble. Box Lando 1 lap earlier, box Piastri 2 laps earlier, box Lando on the lap that they boxed him on. What's the problem there? Like, he clearly has the gap. Now, Piastri was a couple of seconds up the road. Then he made a mistake coming out. I'm not saying he would have done that because it's a different scenario, but he did make a couple of mistakes, which then invited Lando back into the race. So Lando definitely was in a position to try and win the race. And I can see why him coming out in front of Piastri, he should feel like he has every right to win this race. But like you say, he doesn't know what the teams are saying and what's happened before that that's led him to that situation. But the problem is McLaren, they've waited too long to box Lando to the point where to box Piastri, so they had to box Lando first. They've invited that situation. I think I had 4 laps to make that decision. They clearly had the pace. This is what I'm saying. I can't remember. I apologize. I may have said this on the pod. I may have said it before the pod. But they're making defense at times when they don't need to defend. You've got the fastest package. You've got the race pace. You've got the tyres. You've got the tyre offset. All you need to do is execute the correct strategy. If you execute the correct strategy, you will win the race. That's what they didn't do in Silverstone. They were too busy trying to cover Hamilton that if they'd have just gone with the correct strategy, they'd have won the race. Ask Fernando Alonso about, doing whether you go for the correct strategy or you try and cover someone in a race, because that's how he lost a world championship. You've got to go with what's gonna get you to the finish flag at the quickest time. That's what they should have done with Piastri. Got him in 2 laps earlier. Lando can still box on the same lap. This is not a problem. Personal opinion, Lando still wins that race, because I know they're saying, agreement before the race, the first corner winner, all that stuff. Why was it then that they came over the radio to Lando and said, you can race the other papaya car, but you have to stay within this delta? That's basically what they said. So he's basically said, if Piastri makes mistakes, you can challenge him. That's what they were saying. And Piastri did make some mistakes today. Under pressure, he made a couple of mistakes. He was 4 seconds ahead of Lando. Lando closed into just outside DRS before the pit stops, and that's what caused this situation. So I'm not saying that Piastri shouldn't have won the race and he doesn't deserve to, because he absolutely does. But had Lando Norris handled this situation slightly better, had McLaren come over and said, this is an instruction, change positions, after creating this problem, then the problem goes away. if Lando says, okay, that's fine, I've got a 3.5-second advantage, I'm now going to go into maximum tyre save mode, let Piastri gradually eat his tyres up, catching up to me, let him through without losing any time, give it a lap or two, then on my superior tyre life, I can say, hey guys, I'm really being held up here, we got guys closing on us, and then go and execute the pass anyway. I don't see why that couldn't have happened. And then everyone lauds Norris by saying, what a great team player. He gave up the lead and he still won the race anyway. Now they're just saying, look, he's a petulant child. So I feel like McLaren and Lando Norris both could have done better with this. And you're always harsh on the ones you love the most. But I'm going to be very critical of both McLaren and Lando again, which is really disappointing to be incredibly critical of McLaren and Lando Norris on a race when McLaren have got their first 1-2, say, since 2021. And the first time they've qualified on first and second since 2012 as well. And it's been a brilliant weekend for McLaren. But like you say, they've tainted it. Oscar's got nothing to be ashamed of. He's done everything right today, apart from those few small mistakes on track, but he still did enough to win the race. But it's just a bit of a shame that McLaren have invited criticism once again. But I will say it's definitely a step up. They have improved. They've learned from their mistakes from last weekend. They are getting better. They will get there, but they just need to do it soon.
Absolutely. I think it's safe to say that it is a sort of learning curve for McLaren. And I know I've said it before myself on the pod that McLaren looks like a team that doesn't know how to win. And I think once again, they almost proved that today with the strategy that they called, because once again, they nearly shot themselves in the foot. Thankfully, they didn't, but it was mighty close. So, chaps, just before we sort of move on and wrap up, I just want to say if anybody listening has enjoyed this show, please do consider giving us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It does help us out. Also, if you're watching live, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff, notifications, etc. That's definitely 100% house written in the script, by the way. Now, chaps, thank you for joining. I just want to give you both a quick chance to promo anything. So, Owen, I mentioned you are a co-host here at Grid Talk. Is there anything else you want to give a shout out to?
That would only be Formula Talk, to be quite honest. That's our sister show, hosted by Sophia Richmond. Completely forgot her name then. Sophia Richmond, and you can find that on everywhere that you find find the Grid Talk, and you can find out all the sort of the happenings in I think a relatively exciting feeder series weekend.
Absolutely. And Tom, I mentioned you're a co-host here. You also host your own podcast with good friend of the show, Carl. That is called the Monkey Seat Podcast. Do you want to tell us a bit more about Grid Talk's dirty cousin?
Exactly that. If you want Grid Talk uncut, then go to see Monkey Seat. It's the idiot in the room, Carl, asking stupid questions about F1, and then me trying to tell him why he's wrong. We often swear at each other and criticize people in a polite but not offensive manner, but still enough to get people riled up. It's just a couple of lads having a laugh about themselves and Formula One in general. So if you just want to have a listen to two people prattling around for a bit less professional, a bit less crisp and produced quite as well as Grid Talk, then Monkey Seat's where you want to go. That's on, just search Monkey Seat, you'll find it.
Lovely stuff. Cheers, Tom. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to check out Grid Talk, please do follow us on our socials at Grid Talk UK. So Grid Talk is available on YouTube, where most episodes are recorded live, such as this one, and we'll quite often do a post show, as we're going to do today. So please do stick around if you are in the live chat. We will be answering your questions and carrying on to discuss this. You can also find us on Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Cast. Just search Formula One Grid Talk or our back catalogue of shows for previews and reactions to race results. Please consider supporting the channel on Patreon to help support the show. Also, make sure make sure you subscribe so you're the first to know when each new episode is released. We'll be back soon. That'll be on Wednesday with more F1 content, namely previewing the 2024 Belgian Grand Prix. Until then, thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Bet Online, and goodbye. And segue into post show. See what I mean? Reverb.
How do you not make a decision in 50 minutes? I want to know.
Because Formula One, goddammit, and the FIA.
Well, so, they probably had to listen to Max rant for 40 minutes first, and now they've got to make a decision.
Well, to be fair, they were probably wading through all the swearing on his team radio to try and understand exactly what happened. But no, thank you to everybody who is sticking around in the post show. So we have a couple of questions and points which I'll get into now. So the first one I saw, which is about 10 minutes in. Oh heck, how'd you say this? Sai Rugara. I hope I didn't butcher that, which I definitely did.
You definitely did.
I definitely did. I absolutely definitely did. Alpine have avoided the clangor 2 for 4 months. They finally won it. Yeah, there was a bit of a clangor, wasn't it? Locking out the back row, and then Piastri DNFing with, was it cooling? No, was it a hydraulic issue? Maybe
Gasly, I think, not Piastri.
Oh, yeah. Oh, heck. Yeah. Sorry,
they were the only 2 cars to not be on track when the track was at its best in qualifying. That's why they qualified 19th and 20th. So that's just Alpine all over. And then Ocon getting to a lofty heights of 18th in the race, only beating Zhou Guanyu.
Wow.
In the worst car in the grid. So still finishing behind Logan Sargent, Valtteri Bottas, and Kevin Magnussen.
Yeah, but Logan Sargent is the new GOAT, as we have established.
Yes.
With him getting out of Q1 on 2 weekends on the row and that qualifying Perez,
I did not expect to be talking about Alpine and Sargent on the show. I'm not going to lie.
No, well, hence why this is the post show. Because to be fair, there wasn't really much to sort of mention with them. My good friend of mine, Nez, is here. He's left a couple of comments, which we'll get to in a bit. But yes, good evening, Nez. Jared Bradley, he said he's stuck on a bus somewhere between Rome and Milan, possibly near Florence. He said, "I'll listen later." He listened to the race on the radio, so he's heard the good news and all the drama. I'm looking forward to hearing your opinion when I get to Wi-Fi/steady data coverage. So yeah, Jared. Lovely as always to see you dropping in, and yes, please do please do give a listen later on. So one thing that Nez said, this is about 5:30. I think this is where we're talking about Perez. He said Perez underperforming isn't just a problem for the Red Bull constructors. I also think it's limited Max so much on strategy, which is why we have seen Norris start to creep up on him in the drivers' championship. Which one of you wants to take that?
Yeah, 100%. We've seen many times that you can pincer people. You can obviously Max. Basically, Red Bull have to choose at some point, like which way they want to go strategy wise. They don't have the fastest car anymore, so they can't do what Thomas said that McLaren should be doing, which is just picking the fastest way to get from lap 0 to lap 70 or whatever it ends up being. They haven't done that. Whereas they have to pick probably in some ways a compromise strategy. They don't do that, so they don't have that second driver who can cover off things for them, and they're increasingly getting more and more teams and more drivers forcing them into corners that they won't be able to use Max's pace and ability to get out of. I mean, we're seeing that today. If they have an off day, then they have races like this. I think that's 100% why that's an issue. Like, if you didn't have Perez performing very, very well in Abu Dhabi, it becomes an awful lot more difficult for Max. Sorry, Abu Dhabi 2021. It becomes an awful lot more difficult for Max to put himself in a position to win that championship, because Lewis would have had less time behind a slower car.
Yeah, exactly. And 2021 was arguably Perez's best year in that Red Bull. He's just been on a steady decline ever since. Tom, do you want to add anything?
I don't think Norris is in the championship fight. I don't think he ever has been in the championship fight. So I don't see why it was an issue swapping the positions over. As I've already said on the show, I think Norris probably could have come back and won anyway. So I think his inexperience has lost him a race win again, which is difficult. But I'm sure he'll start racking the wins up at some point. It's crazy to think he's level on wins with Piastri and 1 behind Russell. And 2 behind Sainz, given how well he's been performing this year. But just imagine how good the season would have been if that McLaren had been good from the start. That's one of the great what might have been. But next season, oh my God, it's going to be fire, isn't it? Next season, it's going to be great.
Didn't we say that last season?
Sorry,
didn't we say that last season?
No, I don't think we did. I don't. Not to the same degree. Not to the same degree. I thought, oh yeah, people are catching, but then obviously the start of the season, Red Bull was so fast. I can't see that happening next year, though. I can see it being a lot closer. So no, I don't think he's definitely getting closer. It'll be great. Wouldn't it be great if we got into the last race of the season and Norris is within 25 points of Verstappen? Like just to think, well, yeah, he's got a chance, even if it's never going to happen. Max goes and wins it, but you just know Norris is in second place and Verstappen's winning in Abu Dhabi, and then he starts complaining about shifts, and we're like, oh, if Verstappen retires, Norris is going to win the title. Just something just to keep us going. It's not going to happen, but if we could just get to that point, so he's within 25 points, I will be absolutely ecstatic with the season. But yeah, he's not going to win the championship.
No, and as I said, sort of in Slack, and as I said, sort of in a few recent episodes, the damage was done in terms of the Drivers' Championship at the start of the season. I know, and you made a very good point of sort of likening it to the Brawn in 2009. The Constructors, I think, is a completely different ball game. I think Red Bull are definitely going to have sort of, they're going to be looking over their shoulder for the rest of the season, because if Perez isn't getting these points, and if Max is sort of finishing second, third, so that's 18 or 15 or 19 and 16 or whatever, if he gets the fastest lap, and then Perez gets 1 point here and then sort of no points for like 3 races, and then McLaren are constantly getting sort of if they get like a 1-2, then a 2-4, and a sorry, the cat just stood on my foot. It could very much sort of swing the tide for them. So there's nothing in this championship is a given this season. I don't think.
I've just done the maths.
Yeah.
If Verstappen wins every race, McLaren finish second and third, and Perez finishes 9th, then McLaren win the Constructors' Championship.
I really think McLaren could win it this season.
That's without any sprints taken into account either. That's just on the remaining races. So they definitely can if Perez continues at this rate. Surely he can't carry on being this rubbish. You'd think he'd be back up there in 6th place at least. He seems to be a friend of 7th place. 7th, 8th place seems to be his kind of peak at the moment. He's not finished above there. We'll just have a quick look at the results there. So 7th today. I think he's, what was he? He was 7th a few weeks ago as well. 8th. It's just not been good. A couple of non-classifieds. The last time he was anything higher than that, I think he had a 5th place somewhere, like way back around Imola time. 4th place in Miami was the last time he was anywhere near competitive. And that's Miami. That was race 6.
The last time he was on the podium was in China.
Yeah. Which is the race before Miami.
Do we see him doing well in Spa?
No.
I think Red Bull will be better in Spa. I think Red Bull will be back to being the fastest car in Spa. But McLaren apparently are bringing a new rear wing in Spa. Andrew Stella let slip in one of the interviews post-race.
That makes sense. It'll probably be I guarantee that'll be the sort of Spa and Monza spec rear wing, the low drag
one that they didn't have last year.
Yeah,
they didn't have it.
Yeah, because last year McLaren were dynamite in that middle sector. All through Blanchimont and Pouon, they were so quick. But on the Kemmel Straight and through the bus stop chicane and everything, they were really, really slow because they were carrying too much rear wing ultimately.
That's what lost them the race.
Yeah, exactly. We have some more comments. So we've got one from the Woden one. Is that Obi-Wan Kenobi with a list, maybe? Ricard Slow is washed. Has to be someone else. I think, he's Danny Rick is, I presume, Thomas, is going back to when you're talking about who, could replace Perez. I really don't see it being Daniel Ricciardo. Bear in mind, he's been talked about being replaced at V-Carb. Why on earth would they then put him in the main team?
Well, I've already given my point on this. I don't think they should, but I think they will, because they just seem to have this massive, I won't say that word on the stream, but it seems to have this massive favouring for Ricciardo. And if he can give them enough reasons why, if he sticks it on the podium or in the top 6 in Spa, you can see over the summer break they'll do it, because he's got the experience of being up there. And out of the 3 to put in a Red Bull, you would think that he would be the one who would perform at the highest level, or certainly perform at a high enough level to be of help in the Constructors' Championship. So it's unless they can get someone out of another contract, unless they can somehow strike a deal with Ferrari. get Sainz in early and get Behrman in there for the rest of the year at Ferrari, something like that.
I wouldn't be against it.
It would almost be worth it as well, because this honestly, this problem is entirely of Red Bull's own making, because they've churned through every single young driver in their program to the point where they've got no one that they can bring up now, sort of thing. I've no sympathy for it. I just get to watch the results, which is vaguely hilarious. I just don't. I don't know. I don't see you putting Ricciardo in there and him performing immediately, and Yuki's.
Buttercream Field wants to make a bet. Now you know what my betting record on Grid Talk's like.
Five says Perez won't get any more than 2 podiums this year.
I'm not going to take that bet because I don't think he will.
I was going to say, I might as well just burn a fiver.
Yeah, I think that's easy money. Buttercream Fiend is Holly, friend of the show, and co-host Ruby's friend. That's how we all met. At least I think it is. Anyway, apologies if it's not. And my mouse has run out of battery, so that's why I'm currently sort of shimmying stuff. So I'm trying to plug it into charge.
Thanks for problems.
I know. Yeah, thank the Lord for USB-C. Eh?
Yeah.
But Holly said Perez. Time for Perez to go, no matter who they give the car to. And then we had a bit of chatter on McLaren. So Nez, who's a mate of mine, as I mentioned earlier, said, I think McLaren needed that today to make the team stronger. And Holly said, awful for McLaren, to be honest, did not like the radio messages one bit. Then she said, if Piastri came out of the pit within 2 seconds, it would have been a fairer ask. But it's an absurd request at the time. Piastri slipped up and dropped time twice. His placement was his own fault.
It's a less extreme version of going back a long time here. So apologies if people don't remember this, but going back to 1998 McLaren, when you've got McLaren have got the fastest car by about 3 seconds a lap, but it's never done a race distance. They have no idea who's going to get to the end of the race. And Häkkinen's leading Coulthard. The agreement was first turn, whoever gets into turn 1 first wins the race. And then Häkkinen, who still had some issues with his hearing after his massive crash, he thought they said box, but they said something else, and he ended up coming into the pits, driving through the pits, and then ending up behind David Coulthard. So then Coulthard did the gentlemanly thing and let Häkkinen back through. There was no team orders there. That was just done between the drivers. But it's a less extreme version of that, in that Lando ended up in a position where he could have won the race, probably shouldn't have won the race because of what the team had agreed, but then ended up giving up a race win to his teammate. Now, his teammate then went on to win 2 world championships, and David Coulthard became the nearly man of Formula One. So if I'm calling it now, Oscar Piastri, 2-time world champion, Lando Norris will never win.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Wayne, do you want to add to that?
No, I'm good.
That's your history lesson, everyone, for the old people in the room.
Yeah. Well, you mean you?
Yeah.
I remember watching all of that when I was 1 year old.
Were you 1 in 1998?
Yeah. Maybe not even.
I'm leaving.
I'll be honest with you. Maybe not even, because Spa might have been earlier than it was.
It wasn't Spa. It was the first race of the season.
Oh right, well then it definitely wasn't. I would have been like 6 months old at that point.
If I said Spa, I meant Melbourne.
Oh right, sorry. Yeah, I heard Spa. Sorry, I don't know. Maybe my hearing's going.
Yeah. No, you're not the old one like me.
I don't necessarily understand the idea of if you get into the first corner first. I'm just like, yeah, but the race takes place over 300 kilometers.
I hate it. I think someone put on there about team orders. It should be policed. I don't think it should be policed because it's a team sport, but they definitely should not be calling races off on the first corner. I'm fine with it, like at the end of the last set of stops, or you say yes, you can race, but it has to be clean, or that kind of thing. Just I hate the phrase "let them race," but just literally, it's a race. Yeah. It is a race. Call it off in the last 10 laps if you've got someone chasing down on you. But if they were in a league of their own, calling that race off at that point was just wrong for the sport.
Mercedes are the best that have done it, and even they've messed it up before. But it's something you have to learn, I think, of how to manage 2 incredibly competitive drivers.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say Red Bull have ever done it the best, but
and it's a race like this where you got both drivers who are within hundredths of each other as they were in qualifying. Excuse me. This is where we see drivers at the very edge, because as we saw, both Lando and Oscar They both could have easily won today. It was always going to be a McLaren victory today. Once they got through turn one like they did, and everybody survived with their front wings intact and no punctures and all the rest of it, it was pretty apparent that McLaren was going to be the team that won. And it was just a question of which driver it would be. Now, we talked about it earlier on the main show, with it being that Lando kind of, this is just me sort of giving my own viewpoint on it. I get why Lando wanted the win, because he's a racing driver, and every racing driver wants to win, whether it's winning the race, whether it's winning the battle for the podium, or whether it's winning the battle for between P14 and P15. It doesn't matter where you are on the grid. You have these little battles, and every driver wants to win. Every driver wants to win that little battle, and it doesn't matter if it's for World Championship or if it's for P12 in a race that is complete dead rubber. It doesn't matter where it is from a driver's perspective. They want to win, and that's where you need the race engineers to say sometimes we need to look at the bigger picture here. And if McLaren is serious about catching Red Bull, well, I think what they did today, I think that was the best thing for the team, because Piastri had earned the right to win that race. He got the better start, and it was interesting actually in the coverage. Sky, I think it was Karun Chandhok was on the Sky pad. It might have been Anthony Davidson, I can't remember. It was one of them. They did a piece to camera where they're talking about Lando's race starts and how he hasn't had the best of race starts. And once again today, it proved it. I even thought initially Lando's got the better start, because Lando's first phase of the launch, he moved really well. But then when he dropped his clutch for the second phase of the launch, it was like he didn't quite get going. And that was where we saw Piastri come through. And Lando was so busy trying to keep Piastri at bay on the right-hand side, because that is a long run down to turn one. That's where Verstappen sort of went, oh, well, I got the racing line on the outside. And then he did Verstappen things, and we know what happened there. And Lando was so busy trying to keep Piastri at bay, I thought he's going to cost the team here. And then that's why I sort of just put ... in Slack, because once again he bottled it. And at the end of the race, well, the sort of the final stint, he got the preferential treatment, and it was obvious from the outset that the agreement was you will give the position back to Piastri. Now, I wasn't expecting Lando to stamp on the brakes and give it back to him, because that wouldn't have done anything for anybody. And as soon as we saw that incident between Max and Hamilton, McLaren should have just said at that point, right, that's it. Lando, you give the position to Piastri, as we discussed, blah, 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 team order, blah, blah, blah. And I think the other issue was, and I don't know how many times I need to say this now, McLaren don't know how to win. And today they nearly shot themselves in the foot once again. As soon as Lando started having his stroppy teenager phase, it should have come from the top. It should have come from, what's his face? Andrea Stella. It should have come. We should have heard Andrea Stella's voice over the radio saying, "Right, team orders. This is what we agreed. You do this. You do that. I'm in charge. This is what we do." That's what we needed to hear. We've heard it with Toto in the past, and I know we've mocked, certainly I've mocked in the past. It's been like, Toto's come on the radio and sort of been like blah blah blah.
Lewis, we know the car's bad. Please drive it.
Yeah, do you know what? That's a perfect example, mate. And that's what was needed today. And we saw it in Hungary in 2017 where Bottas and Hamilton swapped places and then swapped back again, because that was the agreement. And there was a championship fight going on there. One that was an awful lot closer than what is apparently going on this season.
Yeah, so I agree. Yeah. Piastri definitely earned the opportunity to fight for that win, and I just think Lando could have handled it a bit better. All he had to do was give him the place back and then race him to the finish. And then if the team called it off, if the team called it off, the team called it off. But
yeah, exactly. But
Oscar absolutely deserved to be in front at the end of the start of the third stint. He deserved to be in that position. Yeah. And then his mistakes are what brought Lando back into the fight. And then I still would have backed Lando to win that race had the team not interfered. But his petulance has led him to lose another race win. So hopefully he'll grow up and he will understand that there's a bigger picture at play here. But at least I will say he did the right thing in the end. I think the team will still respect him for that, and they'll understand what a difficult position they put him in by making that error and not bringing in Piastri a lap earlier.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will then help them to learn that position won't be repeated again. And Oscar, given that he's been given this race win with no challenge at the end there, whereas he could have done it the other way around, then hopefully Oscar will support Lando in a situation in a championship fight in future, because that would have been the start of a very combustible relationship between them had he not done that. So I'm glad he did it. I'm a huge Lando Norris fan. I'm glad he gave the position back to Piastri. I just wish he'd done it earlier and then fought for the win. But give me a choice, 5 laps to go, I'd say, look, pull over, let Piastri win the race, because that's the best thing to do for the team.
Yeah, exactly. One of the final things with she said, victory should only belong to those that can claim it, and Piastri couldn't or didn't catch up, though. Disagree, because Piastri had claimed it before turn 1, and he claimed it for the first 2 stints. And it was only because the team boxed Lando first that was why he came out ahead.
Yeah.
So I disagree on that one. Right, we're going to bring this to a close because we have things to do. Tom has a little Balbaniesi to attend to.
And clearly the FIA stewards don't.
Yeah,
well, exactly.
Refreshing Chris Medland for the last hour, just hoping that something comes through, because he's always the one that breaks it first.
I was going to say, I'm on the FIA's decision document page. It's okay.
Same,
everyone got scrutineered. everyone got scrutineered. It was fine.
Yeah, they've done scrutiny in, but they haven't given us a decision on the Verstappen thing. But no, I'm going to bring this to a close. So yeah, thank you everybody for taking part in the post show. Have a lovely rest of your Sunday, and we will see you next week.
Yay for Spa!
Woo, Spa! Last week.